The game that we're going to be looking at today is a game that was played by correspondence. Now, in the old days, that was quite a popular way of playing chess. We don't use correspondence chess too much anymore. But what would happen is there would be two people in different countries who wanted to play a game against each other. And there was no such thing as the internet, so they couldn't sort of email each other. And it was very expensive to travel from country to country. So what they would do is they would play chess by letter. And they would write a letter, "Dear friend in a different country, I'd like to move my pawn forwards 2 squares. Looking forward to seeing what your next move is going to be." And you post it off, and you might wait 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 12 weeks, depending on how good your postal system was, and then you'd get a reply back from that person who would say, "Hey, thanks very much for moving that pawn forwards. I'm going to move my pawn forwards," and the game would go on like that. So you can, excuse me, you can imagine if you can imagine how long those games would take if each move could take sometimes up to a month for each move. So you're only going to be doing, 6 to 12 moves each year. So very slow way of playing chess. But often what would happen is someone would get the move and they would spend maybe a few days thinking about it when they were at home before they decided what move to do and write it into a letter. So yeah, interesting way of playing chess. We're going to see this game here that was played by two players in a correspondence game, and we're following on from a game that we saw last week, which was a French defence game. So the French defence, white starts off with his pawn to e4, right? Good strong move controlling the centre of the board, and black plays his pawn 1 step forwards. And when you move the pawn 1 step forwards, we call that the French defence. Now, everybody should know from last week what the best move to be, on the second move should be for white. And if you think you know what it is, feel free to type that into your chat boxes and tell me what the best move for white in this position would be. Okay, it should be a pretty obvious one, and it also works the same way. If you are playing a game of chess against someone and they do an unexpected opening, a move that you've never seen before, then you should just fall back to your 3 golden rules and think about, well, what's good strategy in this position? Don't worry if you've never seen that move before, just follow good strategy. So it's good we've seen a couple of suggestions. The correct move is pawn to d4 being the best move here. So why is that such a good move? Because it gets a wall of pawns. Right? And a wall of pawns is where you've got 2 pawns next to each other. And 2 pawns next to each other is your strongest, most powerful attacking formation. All right? So you always want to try and aim for a wall of pawns. If your opponent's played an opening that you've never heard of before, you've never seen, no problems. Just aim for your wall of pawns in the center of the board, and you're controlling the center, you're achieving one of your strategies. All right, so the French defense, black plays pawn to d5, setting up a pawn chain. All right, so we know pawn protects pawn protects pawn. You've got those 3 pawns in a diagonal line. That's a pawn chain, and that's a sort of a more defensive formation. All right, the best move for white to play here is to try and keep his wall of pawns in the center of the board. All right, we've got to just protect those pawns rather than moving it forwards or taking him. You want to try and keep that wall of pawns in the center of the board. So the move that white played in this game, and I think it's probably the best move to do, is to develop the knight. And what you're doing there is the knight is protecting the pawn, and you get to keep your wall of pawns in the center of the board. So that's your strongest move, developing a piece, controlling the center of the board. All right, so we know our 3 golden rules: control the center of the board, develop your pieces, and then castle. Well, if we've got our center of the board controlled here with the 2 pawns, we need to start getting our pieces developed. If you play a move like pawn forwards from f2 to f3, all right, let's put that in as a variation here. If you play that pawn forwards there, while that sets up a pawn chain and keeps your center controlled and keeps it safe, what you are doing is you're opening up your weak spot. That's the red square there next to the king. So things can go pretty badly for you. Black might take you, you take back, and then black's queen comes out with a devastating check, and white's now in all sorts of trouble. Okay, if he blocks the check to try and get his king safe, queen comes across, takes the pawn, and again there's a check, and at the same time attacking and winning the rook. So you really don't want to be moving a move like pawn to f3. That opens up the weak spot. We can in fact give it a question mark, and a question mark means that's a bad move. It's opening up the weak spot. Even though it looks like it's a good idea, you've got your pawn chain, because you're opening up the weak spot, it lets black's queen come in and attack you too easily. So the best move, knight to c3, protecting that pawn wall, and black played bishop out to attack and to pin the knight. So knight's attacking the bishop, bishop's attacking the knight, and if the knight moves, then of course that king's going to be in check. So the knight's pinned, and the thing about a pinned piece is it can't move anywhere. So if that knight is pinned, right, it can't move, it's not really protecting this pawn in the middle of the board anymore, right, because the knight's pinned. So if you're not protecting the pawn, you've got to do something about protecting that pawn in the middle of the board. Otherwise, black's next move might just be, well, I'm just going to take that pawn for nothing, and you can't take him back. So we've got to think about a way of keeping that pawn safe. Now, there's a few different things that you can do here. We've had suggestions for doing pawn takes pawn. We've had suggestions for moving the pawn forwards to a3. So, yep, they're all possible moves. In this game, white moved his pawn forwards here and uses this pawn to try and squash black. Right? He uses this pawn to cover those two squares, so it's going to be difficult for black to develop his pieces. And by moving his pawn further forwards, he's trying to squash black back a little bit. It's also okay. There's no problems about moving your pawn forwards on the edge of the board here to a3 to attack the bishop. If he takes your knight, you take him back. He takes your pawn, and you think, oh no, you've got a pawn for nothing. But it's not. White can easily get that pawn back because this pawn is not protected. This pawn is not protected. So when you see two pawns that aren't protected, just move our queen out here, and the queen now attacks both of those pawns at the same time. It's attacking the pawn here and the pawn there. So you're going to get your pawn back anyway, and you're going to have a more attacking position. Your queen's in a good attacking position. So there are some other choices for white to do there. In this game, he's chosen to move his pawn forwards and try and squash his opponent back. Now, if black doesn't get some control over the center of the board, black's being squashed back, he can develop his pieces and castle, but it's going to be much easier for white to get all of the rest of his pieces off the back row. So all of these four pieces here for white are all free to move off the back row into the attack straight away. Right? Whereas black, because he's got the pawn chain a bit further back, black's knight is a little bit harder to get into the attack, his bishop's a little bit more squashed. So black has to find a good way of getting control over the center of the board and try and get rid of those pawns that white has control in the center. And the best move is always to try and get a wall of pawns. So we get the two pawns next to each other in the center of the board. There's our pawn wall, right? And you're using the pawn to attack white's pawn in the center of the board as well. So that's a strong formation where you've got your wall of pawns. Now, while it's strong, you've got that wall of pawns, it's also left one square, or one square in particular, very weak. All right? And the square that's left weak is this square that I've highlighted, D6. See, white's pawn covers that square. And no matter what black plays, black can never have a pawn to attack that. So, yes, the queen can attack it, or a knight or a bishop might be able to attack that square, but no pawn can ever attack that square on D6. And if no pawn can attack the square on D6 and it's protected by a pawn, that's a very strong square for white. All right? That square there, D6, is what we call an outpost. Right? And that's the main thing that I want you to learn from today's lesson, is an outpost is a very powerful square. So we've got a square that's protected by one of white's pawns. Right? The pawn's protecting the square, and none of black's pawns can ever attack that square. All right, so if we can put a piece on that square, then we're going to find, I mean, you can't put a rook on there, but if you could get one of your pieces to that square, you're going to find it's in a really strong position. It's deep in enemy territory, attacking all of black's pieces, and black's going to find it very hard to get that away. So question now for you, what piece is best on an outpost? Right? Because we could put any piece onto that outpost. You could put a knight, a bishop, a rook, a queen, even a king. Which is the best piece to go on an outpost? Because some pieces work better than others on outposts. Right? They're all going to be good in some way, right? But there are some, or there's one piece in particular that you really want on an outpost. It's the best piece for an outpost. All right. Good suggestion from Joy there with the knight is the correct answer. So very good. We want to try and get a knight onto the outpost. So as soon as we see that outpost there, we're thinking, well, gee, how do I get a knight onto that square? How do I get a knight onto that square? Okay. So we've got two knights. Which one is going to be able to get there quicker? And if you think a little bit about it, probably this knight coming here and then here is going to be the quickest way of getting a knight onto an outpost. Okay, two moves, boom, boom, and you can get your knight onto the outpost. This other knight back here on G1, that one's going to take a lot longer to get to that outpost. Right? It's going to be much, much harder to get that knight to the outpost because the only place you can get there safely is really from B5. So moving the knight and then the knight again would get the knight onto the outpost. So what does white do? Well, you can't move the knight straight away because it's still pinned. Right? The bishop's still attacking the king if the knight moves. So he's got to try and block that pin. He's got to get out of the pin, and when he gets out of the pin, then the knight can move away. Attacking the bishop wouldn't help. The bishop can just retreat, and you're still in a pin. Okay, so we need to move the bishop to D2 and leave that knight so the knight can now move away without the king being in check. The only problem with putting the bishop there is that it leaves white's pawn here unprotected. See, the queen was protecting that pawn in the middle of the board before, and now when the bishop's in the way, the queen's blocked. Can't get through anymore to protect the pawn because the bishop's in the way. So black takes advantage of that and says, well, if you're going to give me a pawn for nothing, I'm going to take it. Pawn takes pawn. Getting a free pawn, threatening white's knight here, and really looking quite good in the center of the board. But white's happy to lose a pawn. If he can get a knight to that outpost, he's going to be really happy. A knight on an outpost is so powerful. So he now moves his knight to b5. And as we suspected, his knight's aiming down for this really, really powerful square here on d6. And if he can get that knight onto the outpost, he's going to be dominating the game. Right. The other thing that he's doing, you'll also notice that he's trying to swap off bishop for bishop. Right? If he trades off bishop for bishop, then black's got even, that's one less piece that can cover the outpost. All right? So black's got to make a decision. Does he swap off bishop for bishop and give away the outpost, or does he save his bishop and try and keep the outpost protected? So what he chooses to do is probably the best move. He keeps his outpost protected. He moves his bishop back one square, and you'll also notice that the bishop now protects the pawn in the middle of the board, because if he didn't protect that, then it's possible that white's knight might just come back and take it, and so he's not a pawn ahead anymore if that happens. All right, so white still wants to get his knight onto that outpost. Maybe he wants to take that pawn as well. All right, that would be cool if he can get that pawn back. Then he's not losing by anything anymore. So what move can he play? We've got already a suggestion from Joy about moving this pawn forwards, but what can he do to try and get rid of that bishop so that there's a way of getting onto his outpost? Oh, wow. Very good suggestion from Joy again. You guys there in Joy's class are doing really well today. Pawn to b4. Excellent move. By moving the pawn to b4, you're threatening the bishop. That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? And now black's bishop has to make a choice. Does the black bishop retreat this direction, which leaves the outpost open, or does it retreat back in that direction, which leaves his pawn free to be taken? So black has to make a choice. Does he protect the outpost, or the pawn. And he chose in this game to protect the pawn. He's being greedy. He wants to stay a pawn ahead. So he moves his bishop back to b6 and he tries to stay ahead. I think that's probably a mistake. Instead of that, if he'd moved his bishop back to e7, right, keeps protection over the outpost, white's next move is probably going to be queen g4, bringing the queen into a good attacking position, threatening this pawn, and white will still have a good attacking position, and white's going to take that pawn on d4. Okay, the knight could take it, or the queen could take it next move. So white's going to have a good attacking position, altogether 1, 2, 3 pieces off the back row and attacking. Black's only got the one bishop attacking. So 3 pieces in attacking positions. Queen's threatening 2 pawns. Looks like a really good position for white. Right? Easy for the bishop to get into the attack, easy for the knight to get in the attack, and white can just attack black with every opportunity. Retreating the bishop, though, does leave that outpost undefended. So you can put the knight in there any time that we want. White doesn't move the knight in there straight away. First, plays queen to g4. And again, same as before, the queen's threatening the 2 pawns. Okay, and 2 pawns are in danger. Black has to try and save both of them, or one of them. The one that you definitely want to save, that's more important to save, is the one on g7. Because if the queen comes down and takes that, not only is he going to take that, but then he'll take the rook, then he'll take the knight, and the queen will just mop up all of your pieces in the back corner. So how does he protect that pawn on g7? Well, there's really only one way to protect it, and he figures he's going to be checked next move. The knight's going to come in, this knight's going to be moving into d6 and onto the outpost and putting him in check anyway, so he may as well move his king now and use his king to protect that pawn. Okay, and that's good. King's protecting the pawn, and now white has a choice here. White can choose, actually, in the game he chose to move his pawn forwards. There you go. He moves his pawn forwards to protect that, so the queen can't come in and take it. Was the move that he actually chose. There we go. Next move he's going to move his king, because now the knight comes in onto the outpost. Right? Best square for the knight, protected by a pawn. Nothing can chase that knight out of the way, and black's in check. So now black, being in check, has to move his king, and so he moves his king across to f8 to get himself safe. All right, so now white has to find a way to keep this attack rolling. Okay, this queen's being blocked off a little bit here. What you'll notice is that all of black's pawns are on white squares. Okay, so all of the pawn chains that you make cover just one colour squares. All right, they usually cover either blacks or whites. That pawn chains only cover one colour. So what white wants to do is to use his bishop and attack somewhere around all of these black squares. Okay, because number one, the pawns aren't defending the black squares. Also, the queen and the king, the 2 most important pieces, you won't want to try and take the queen or put the king in check or checkmate. Those 2 most important pieces are also on black squares. So what we're noticing is that when all the pawns are on white squares, the black squares are the ones that are a little bit weak. So white wants to try and find a way to get an attack going on the black squares, and also he wants to threaten a checkmate. So he plays queen f4, and his queen is threatening the weak spot. Right, so next move, queen takes pawn would be checkmate. Right, that's a pretty obvious threat. Queen's going to come down, take the weak spot, be protected by the knight. All right, the knight's protecting the queen, and there's going to be checkmate. So black's faced with that checkmate threat, and white's also been able to put the queen onto a black square to help attacking in between where all the pawns are. Now, it's a tricky situation here for black. If black tries to move the knight to protect the pawn, the queen's just going to have him taken. All right? Queen just comes and takes the knight. So he could try with the queen to protect the weak spot, but then if the queen protects the weak spot, the knight takes the bishop, and the queen's not protecting the bishop anymore. So what what black played here was pawn forwards to f6. Stops the checkmate, but by moving your pawns forwards, the more pawns you move forwards in front of your king, the weaker your king becomes. So black's king is a little bit open, and white can play pawn takes pawn here, getting rid of some of the pawns that are protecting black's king. All right, opening the king up, threatening maybe to move his pawn forwards and be only one step away from getting a queen. When that pawn moves away to take, it's opening up the king, but it's also leaving that knight that was on an outpost undefended except for his queen. So an outpost is a square that has to be protected by a pawn. So this is no longer an outpost. The knight was on an outpost, great spot for it, and it's still in a really good position, but it's no longer an outpost. It's not protected by a pawn anymore. And so black thinks, well, hang on a second, if it's not protected by a pawn anymore, maybe I should try and take advantage of that and attack that knight. Yep. So black played bishop to c7. And what he's doing here is he's using his bishop to pin the knight. Right? So he's attacking the knight, pinning the knight to the queen, and he's also got his queen coming to attack it. So there's two pieces attacking white's knight, only protected by a queen, and white has to try and find a way to protect that knight if he doesn't want to lose it, because next move, bishop just takes the knight, free knight. Okay, so there's the pin. The question is here, what can white play? White's got a really good attack on the black squares, and in fact this game ends up in a checkmate in just 3 more moves. So white can get black's king into checkmate in 3 moves, but it's not an easy way, it's not an easy move to see, to work out how white's going to do that checkmate in 3 moves. He's going to use all the pieces that he's got in the attack. The knight, the queen, the bishop. And this pawn here is in a really good spot as well, near the king. Right, so it's really 4 pieces attacking towards the king. Black doesn't have very much to defend with. Maybe black can use the knight and the bishop for defense. Right? Maybe you can use the queen a little bit for defense. But really, because black's only got 1 piece developed off the back row into the attack, right, all of the other pieces just sitting on the back line doing nothing, it's really like white's playing 4 against 1. Okay, so there's been a few suggestions. Most people seem to be suggesting to move the pawn forwards for white. Okay, and moving the pawn forwards, let's have a look at that, seems like a good plan, because you're only 1 step away from getting a queen. You're threatening to take the knight. So it does seem like a good move. It does seem like a good move. The problem with moving the pawn forwards there is it's not really a forcing move. Right? You're not sure what black's going to do here. Black might move the bishop, he might move the queen, he might move the knight, he might move the pawn, like he might move this knight. You just don't know. There's just so many different moves. Could move the knight to f6, yeah, that would get the knight safe. So lots of different moves that black could play, and you don't know which one it's going to be. So to try and think through all of them is going to hurt your brain. It's going to be too hard. If we take a step back and we look for all the forcing moves, the forcing move is a check or a capture. Now, a forcing move controls your opponent. It tells them what to do. So you don't have to think about a whole heap of different moves. So can anyone suggest some forcing moves for me? It doesn't matter if they're not good moves. Right? I'm happy to have a bad move suggested, but you have to at least think about every single possible forcing move, right? Even if they're bad, because you never know when a forcing move might turn out to be a good one, even if it looks bad to start off with. So some of the forcing moves that we've got here, well, we've got queen takes pawn, we've got knight takes bishop, we've got queen to h6 check, all right? We've got knight takes pawn. All right? Forcing moves are only checks or captures. Right? We've got some people suggesting that, oh, you could move the bishop into the attack or move the knight into the attack somewhere. But those are not forcing moves. If you move the bishop or the knight, your opponent can do anything that he wants. if you do bishop takes knight, or knight takes bishop, or knight takes pawn, or queen takes pawn, or queen here check, if you do a check or a capture, you're controlling the game. Your opponent has to reply in a certain way. If you take a piece and he doesn't take you back, you're winning. If you put him in check, the laws of chess say you must get out of check. So if you want to try and control the game and force your opponent to do something, you have to use a check or a capture. All right? So we've got a few suggestions. Like, you have to think about them. Knight takes pawn. Well, doesn't look like a great move because you're going to lose your queen. But then you think a few steps ahead and think, well, but then hang on, then I could take his queen. Oh, but then he could take my bishop. And you start thinking a few steps ahead. And because it's a forcing move, you can predict what your opponent's going to do. Now, all the time when it's forcing moves, if you've got a choice, the first one to think about is going to be the checks. And we've got one suggestion here, again coming from Joy's group, about how to get a checkmate. And it's a pretty good suggestion. So let's have a look. It comes with not 100%, but it's a good suggestion. It comes with the most powerful of the forcing moves. It's the queen to h6 check. Because when you put your opponent's king in check, there's no choice for your opponent except they have to get out of check. There's no choice apart from that. All right, so here we've got black's king in check. All right, queen's attacking the king. Now the king can't move very many spots. Can't move here because of the knight. Can't move here because of the knight. Can't move here because of the pawn. Can't move there because of the pawn. Right, so there's really only one move. Right, when you're in check, kill, block, or run are the three things to think about. There's only one move that he can do, and it's forced. Got to take the queen. Now you might think, well, hang on a second, why would I do that? Why would I want to sacrifice my queen for no reason? Well, when you think a few steps ahead, you might start to see. If you sacrifice your queen, it means now your bishop can come in and take the knight. Right? So when the bishop takes the knight, you put black in check again. There's the check. Bishop's attacking the king check. And black's king can't move here because of the knight, can't move here because of the knight, can't move here because of the pawn, can't move there because of the bishop. There's only one spot. All of the other spots near the king are covered. Right? Can't take the bishop, can't block it off. Only thing he can do is move his king away. So he moves his king away into the corner, and now we should be able to see a checkmate because the king can't move here or here from the bishop. The knight covers this square. So all you have to do is put the king in check to make it a checkmate. And this is an extremely rare checkmate. We're using a pawn to attack the king. The pawn's protected by the knight. The bishop covers the squares to the side, and the pawn attacks the king, and that's checkmate with a pawn. I don't know how many games that you'll see where someone uses a pawn, the weakest of all your pieces, to get checkmate, but I know it's very rare, very rare. So this is an amazing checkmate here, with his white's got his knight protecting the pawn, the bishop covering the squares near the king, and having sacrificed his queen to clear away the defences, black's king is now in checkmate. And 3 moves ago, you should be able to think forwards 3 steps and see this position, because black doesn't have a choice at each step of the way. So there's not a lot to think about. Right? You think queen h6 check, oh yeah, he'll take me. Only move. Then you say, oh, well, I'll take him. Put him in check again. Then the only move was for him to move his king, and then you've got him checkmate. So you don't have to think too much about it because all of the moves are forced. You're controlling what your opponent's going to do. So there we go. That was a pretty amazing game. We saw a few things. We saw the controlling the center of the board with the 2 pawns next to each other. We saw the outpost, and I really want you to try and remember that outpost, a square that's protected by a pawn. If you can get your knight onto that outpost and no enemy pawns can attack you, then you're going to be in a killer position with that knight. And then a really nice little checkmate at the end. So thanks everybody for joining in today. I hope that you've learned a few things about chess there, and enjoy your games. When you're playing your games, look for forcing moves, look for outposts, and see how you go.